Viewer discretion is advised. The following story contains sensitive content. For 20 long years, the sudden, inexplicable vanishing of a vibrant teenage girl from her seemingly secure bedroom in a quiet suburban town remained a haunting local ghost story, largely assumed to be a runaway or perhaps a tragic, isolated accident buried by time, until just months ago, when a shocking discovery was made during a demolition project on the edge of town, a hidden compartment yielding items deliberately placed, untouched for 2 decades. This unexpected find doesn't just reopen a cold case, it promises to shatter decades of comfortable assumptions and expose a calculated darkness far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. Before we delve into this chilling case, remember to like and subscribe if you believe secrets eventually find the light. The evening had settled over their quiet suburban street like a warm, comforting blanket. Inside the small 2-story house, laughter still echoed faintly from the living room, where they'd played a board game after dinner. Emily, their vibrant 16-year-old daughter, had been particularly animated tonight, her energy infectious, her plans for the upcoming summer a joyous cascade of possibilities. They were a close family, woven together by shared jokes, quiet evenings, and the fierce, unspoken love that pulsed beneath the surface of their daily lives. The air held the scent of freshly cut grass from earlier, and through the open windows, the gentle chorus of crickets provided a lulling soundtrack to the night. It was an ordinary, perfect night, the kind that built the foundation of a happy life, the kind they would forever cling to in their memories as the before. Midnight struck, the distant chime of the grandfather clock downstairs marking the hour with solemn precision. An uneasy quiet settled in the house. Sarah, Emily's mother, felt a sudden, inexplicable pull, a gentle nagging worry that pricked at the edges of her peace. Leaving Ben asleep beside her, she slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cool hardwood floor. She padded down the short hallway towards Emily's room, the soft glow from the nightlight near the bathroom barely pushing back the shadows. The door was slightly ajar, which wasn't unusual. "Em?" she whispered softly, pushing the door open wider. The moonlight, silver and cold, spilled across the floor from the single window. It illuminated a room frozen in time. Clothes neatly folded on a chair, books stacked by the bed, a half-finished drawing on the desk. But the bed was perfectly made, untouched. Her breath hitched. "Emily?" she called, louder this time, her voice trembling. The silence that answered felt immense, crushing. Ben was instantly beside her, his hand gripping her arm, his eyes wide with shared dread as they scanned the empty space. The air in the room felt suddenly frigid, stolen of warmth. They fanned out, tearing open closet doors, peering under the bed, their frantic movements a stark contrast to the room's unnerving stillness. Every second, the empty space confirmed their fear, the horrifying truth slamming into them with brutal force. Their vibrant daughter, their Emily, was gone. The house, which minutes ago felt like a safe haven, now felt vast, alien, holding a terrifying secret within its familiar walls. The window stood slightly open, the sheer curtain fluttering gently in a non-existent breeze, offering no explanation, only a silent, chilling mystery. Where could she possibly have gone? 17 years fell like heavy stones, each one burying a layer of hope deeper within the earth. The frantic, public searches of the first few months slowly, painfully, withered into quiet, relentless routines. Every sunrise saw Martha by the old rotary phone, dialing numbers that no longer answered, tracing streets on faded maps that felt brittle in her shaking hands. Thomas spent his days combing through local newspapers from years past, haunted by the faces of other missing children, a constant, dull ache behind his eyes. Their once vibrant home became a museum of sorrow. Sarah's room remained untouched, a time capsule of a life frozen at 15. School books lay open on her desk, a half-finished drawing pinned to the corkboard, clothes folded neatly on her bed. The air in the house grew thick with unanswered questions, a tangible weight that pressed down on them both. Laughter had vanished years ago, replaced by a profound silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Each chime, a cruel reminder of fleeting time and enduring loss. Their marriage, once a source of strength, became a shared burden of grief, two ships passing in the night, within the same house, held together only by the invisible tether of their daughter's memory and the desperate, persistent thread of love that refused to break. Thomas would often find Martha sitting by the window in the evening, watching the road, the same road Sarah had walked down that last day, her gaze fixed on the empty asphalt, as if sheer willpower could conjure their daughter back. It was during one such evening, the 17-year mark having just passed with unbearable quietness, that the distant ring of the old phone sliced through the silence, a sound they hadn't heard ring with such urgency in over a decade, pulling them both from the suffocating embrace of the past into a jarring, uncertain present. The house held its breath, a quiet, grief-laden space where 17 years had layered dust and silence over sorrow. Sunlight, thick with floating motes, slanted through the living room window, illuminating the worn carpet where countless family moments had unfolded. Eleanor sat beside Robert on the floor, a cardboard box between them, its lid lifted to reveal a jumble of preserved memories. Faded drawings, school projects brittle with age, a lock of hair tied with a ribbon. Their movements were slow, reverent, sifting through the tangible remnants of a life cut short. It was Robert who found it, tucked beneath a stack of old letters, wrapped carelessly in a small child's scarf. He lifted it out, a small rectangular device, instantly recognizable, yet alien after so long. Their daughter's first cell phone, a relic from a different technological age, its plastic casing scratched, its screen dark. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia, tinged with the ever-present ache, washed over them. It was just another piece of the past, a tangible link to a voice they hadn't heard in so long, destined to be placed gently back, another artifact in the museum of their loss. But then, in the profound, heavy silence of the room, a sound ripped through the air, a shrill, tinny melody, utterly out of place, impossibly loud. The phone in Robert's hand vibrated, rattling against the dry cardboard of the box. Their eyes, fixed on the inert device just moments before, snapped to it. Wide with shock, it was ringing. After 17 silent years, the dark screen flickered to life, displaying an incoming call. Disbelief slammed into them, hard and cold, chasing away the dust and the quiet grief with a jolt of pure, raw adrenaline. Fear, primal and instantaneous, seized their chests. Who? How? The ring continued, a relentless, impossible summons from a grave long sealed, promising something they weren't ready to confront. The stillness of the living room, thick with years of unspoken grief and the quiet hum of a clock counting moments that felt frozen in time, shattered violently. An old-fashioned telephone, long silent except for the occasional unwanted solicitor call they rarely answered, began to ring. The sound was jarring, an alien intrusion into their carefully maintained quiet despair. Evelyn, sitting closest, flinched as if struck, her hand flying involuntarily to her chest. Across the room, Arthur froze, his gaze fixed on the insistent trill sound. Neither moved for a long moment, the ringing echoing the frantic beat of their own hearts, a sound they hadn't allowed themselves to truly hear hope in for over 2 decades. Finally, with a movement that seemed both impossibly heavy and unnervingly quick, Evelyn reached for the receiver. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it, bringing the cold plastic to her ear. The silence on the other end stretched for a second, taut and expectant, before a voice cut through it, not clear, not strong, but raspy, low, like gravel dragged across wood, and strangely distant, as if speaking from a great distance or through something thick and muffling. "She's not gone," the voice whispered, the words barely audible above a static hiss. "Find the bell, under the root." Then, abruptly, the line went dead. Evelyn stood there, the receiver still pressed to her ear, the dial tone a dull, mocking drone after the shock of the voice. Her face, usually etched with resigned sorrow, was a mask of stunned confusion, eyes wide and unseeing. Arthur was instantly at her side, his hand gripping her arm, his own face a mirror of her shock, silently begging for her to repeat what she'd heard. "What? Who was that? What did they say?" he choked out, his voice a raw whisper. The impossible words hung in the air between them. "She's not gone." It was a cruel, fragile spark, instantly igniting a wildfire of conflicting emotions. Exhilarating, terrifying hope warring with the crushing weight of 22 years of assumed tragedy. A dizzying surge of adrenaline mixed with bone-deep fear. 1,000 questions screamed in their minds. Who was that? Was it a sick joke? Was it real? Could she possibly be alive? The cryptic message, "Find the bell, under the root," made no sense, yet it felt like a bizarre, impossible clue thrown into the abyss of their unanswered prayers, pulling them forward into an uncertain, terrifying future they hadn't dared to imagine. The dial tone hummed, a flat, empty sound that felt like a cruel joke after the impossible voice. Sarah's hand trembled, the receiver clattering back into the cradle, as if it were suddenly too heavy to bear. Across the worn kitchen table, Mark stared, his face a mask of stunned disbelief, reflecting her own shattered reality. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Years of quiet, suffocating grief. Years spent constructing a fragile peace around the certainty of loss, now lay in ruins. She was gone. That was the bedrock truth they'd built their lives upon. And yet, a voice undeniably familiar had just spoken. The silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken questions and a terror that clawed at their throats. Hesitation was a lead weight. Who would believe them? Another false lead, another heartache. But the memory of that voice, thin and strained but unmistakably hers, pulsed like a raw wound. Mark finally moved, pushing back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. We have to," he rasped, the words catching. Sarah nodded, reaching instinctively for the phone again, her fingers fumbling with the keypad. The call to the local precinct was difficult, filled with fragmented explanations, met with cautious, professional skepticism. Detective Miller, who remembered the original case from his younger days, listened patiently, a hint of pity in his voice. But the mention of a phone call from a missing person, presumed dead for over 2 decades, was a steep hill to climb. Yet something in their desperate conviction, the sheer, raw grief that still resonated after so long, must have struck a chord. The dusty file, tucked away in cold storage, was pulled once more into the harsh light of day. As they waited, A fragile tendril of hope, dormant for so long it felt alien, began to unfurl in Sarah's chest. She walked to the fireplace, her eyes falling on a framed photograph from years ago. Their daughter, grinning, holding a brightly colored kite. A wave of fierce, protective love washed over her, fueling a determination she thought she'd lost forever. But beneath the surge of hope, the cold dread remained. If it was her, where had she been, and what horrors had she endured that she was only now able to call? The reopened case felt surreal. The turning gears of the system grinding into motion after so many years of stillness. An officer was scheduled to visit. They needed to hear the recording again, if one existed, and verify the improbable details. The echo of that impossible sound vibrated not just in the ears of those who heard it, but deep in the chests of parents whose hope had long calcified into stone. A call, brief and choked, cutting through 20 years of silence. Immediately, the frantic scramble began. Investigators, their faces etched with weary skepticism, quickly overcome by a flicker of possibility, pulled ancient case files, their covers brittle and faded with time. They wrestled with the ghosts of outdated technology. Phone records from 2 decades prior were fragmented, stored on systems now obsolete, the digital footprint of that era frustratingly faint. Tracing a signal made through antiquated analog lines, potentially from a payphone or an early mobile device, felt like chasing smoke in the wind. Yet, they tried with a desperate intensity, born of renewed purpose. Days dissolved into a blur of technical consultations and dead ends. They revisited the old central office, a cavernous room filled with humming machinery that looked like relics from another age. Hoping against hope, some forgotten switchboard log or decaying magnetic tape might hold a ghost of the signal's path. Parents, their hands trembling slightly, pored over maps of the original search area, overlaying grids, trying to match the fleeting audio cues, a distant train whistle, the faint sound of rushing water, to specific locations. They drove familiar roads, now lined with new buildings or overgrown with unchecked nature, pausing at forgotten landmarks, a knot tightening in their stomachs with each unchanged detail that whispered of lost time. The old diner, still standing, where their child had last been seen laughing with friends. The path leading to the creek, now choked with weeds. They interviewed hesitant witnesses who'd long since moved on, their memories hazy, tinged with the trauma they'd tried to bury. Every dead-end street, every disconnected number, every blank stare from someone who couldn't remember chipped away at the fragile hope, leaving behind a raw, aching frustration. It felt like touching a live wire, the shock of possibility followed by the searing pain of limitation. Still, the analysis of the signal, frustratingly broad due to the lack of data, suggested it hadn't traveled far, hinting perhaps at an origin point within a specific, isolated geographical pocket, an area less touched by time, a place where remnants of the past might still linger, waiting to be found. The thought sent a chill down their spines. If the call came from there, after all these years, what did that mean? It was a cold night, the kind that promised frost by morning, and the air outside the bus windows would have bitten sharp. Sarah closed her eyes, picturing it not as memory, but as a chilling reconstruction built from disjointed sounds and whispers, a mosaic pieced together from the faint static of the old phone call and the unsettling layout of the found bus. Inside her mind, the scene unfolded with the stark clarity of a nightmare. The humid air thick with the scent of damp wool, teenage perfume, and maybe a faint hint of gasoline. Headlights sliced through the dense, dripping evergreens that pressed close against the narrow dirt road, trees like silent, judging figures watching from the periphery. Laughter, tired and a little strained after the game, bounced off the vinyl seats. Sounds Sarah knew from her own past, sounds that now felt alien and terrifying. She saw Maya, her best friend, leaning her head against the cool glass, breath misting the pain, lost in her own thoughts. Did a shiver trace its way down Maya's spine then? A prickle of unease? Sarah desperately projected hope onto the image, hoping Maya had somehow sensed the danger, hoped she had been given a fleeting, precious moment to understand. But the phone call offered no such comfort. It was a sudden cutoff, a jumble of sound that hinted at chaos, not premonition. The imagined bus swayed on the uneven ground. The rhythm of the engine, a comforting drone just moments before, might have suddenly felt like a countdown. Darkness pressed in, absolute and isolating, once they turned off the paved road. The faint, sickly glow of the bus's interior lights seemed to shrink the world, making everything beyond the windows feel vast and menacing. Then, the sudden jolt. Not a smooth stop, but a violent lurch that would have thrown them forward in their seats. Silence. Not gradual, but abrupt. The engine dying, the laughter extinguishing like blown-out candles. The only sound would have been the ticking of cooling metal and the ragged breathing of scared kids. Something had happened right there, in that suffocating darkness. Something that shifted the night from an unexpected delay to outright terror. The phone clattered. A muffled shout, a desperate plea cut short. Sarah's stomach twisted, the weight of that unfinished call pressing down on her. What was it that Maya had tried to say before the line went dead? The faintest whisper in the recording hinted at a word, a name perhaps, swallowed by the encroaching silence. Years of chasing ghosts, of phone calls that dissolved into static and whispers of memory that faded like old photographs, had settled into a heavy, dull ache. It wasn't just the passage of time, it was the corrosive feeling of failure, of letting the past remain stubbornly locked away. He stood on the edge of the crumbling foundation stones, overgrown with thorny vines and slick moss, a place only hinted at in the fragmented recollections, where a small, forgotten structure might have stood. The air here felt damp and still, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Digging felt almost futile, a ritual of desperation rather than hope, the trowel biting into the cold ground, turning up roots and rocks. But then, his fingers brushed against something smooth and unnaturally hard, beneath a tangle of roots. His heart gave a violent lurch, a sudden, fierce beat against his ribs. He knelt, carefully excavating the dirt with trembling hands. It was small, tarnished metal, circular, nestled in the soil. As he cleared the last of the earth, its shape became clear, a locket, old and heavy, intricately engraved with symbols he vaguely recognized from faded yearbook photos and hastily drawn sketches from forgotten interviews. He turned it over and over in his palm, the metal cool against his skin. This wasn't a theory, not a memory, not a spectral voice on a line. This was tangible, solid, undeniably real. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through him, wiping away the fatigue of 2 decades. Validation washed over him first, a tidal wave of "I wasn't wrong," powerful enough to make his knees weak. Then came the urgency, a cold, hard knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. This tiny, forgotten object, buried in the ground, was a thread pulled taut from the fabric of the past, leading somewhere concrete, somewhere that could finally, brutally, reveal the truth. He felt a surge of desperate hope, fragile but potent, as his thumb traced the outline of the locket, wondering what secrets might be held within its aged metal, wondering if it would finally open and show him the way. The air in the makeshift incident room felt thick with a new kind of dread. Days bled into nights, spent hunched over maps and scattered evidence from the crash site. Photographs of mangled metal, soil samples, faded yearbooks. At first, they chased ghosts of mechanical failure, rough terrain, or driver error, clinging to the desperate hope it had been a terrible, swift accident. But the pieces didn't fit. The main character, driven by a relentless need for answers that clawed at his sleep, traced the patterns on the crumpled hull again, his finger following a line of impact that seemed deliberately precise, too controlled. He remembered the silence that had met their early searches, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath, not just hiding wreckage, but secrets. Now looking at the tire tracks leading away from the final resting place, not just to it, and the unsettling lack of certain personal items that should have been scattered among the debris, a cold, nauseating certainty began to set in. It wasn't chaos, it was orchestration. The bus hadn't simply crashed, it had been taken there, guided with chilling intent. He picked up a cracked, muddy frame holding a faded picture of a laughing student, a pang of fierce, protective empathy tightening his chest. This wasn't random fate. This was malice. The motives, initially obscured by the shock of discovery, began to take shape like grotesque figures in the shadows. Why this group? Why this place? Whispers in old town records, forgotten grievances, whispers of money and power and control over something hidden beneath the quiet surface of the community, started echoing in his mind. A small, seemingly insignificant item found tucked away, a piece of foreign material, a snippet of unfamiliar wire, hinted not at a lone perpetrator, but at coordinated effort. A chilling tableau of multiple hands guiding the strings of a macabre plot. It wasn't an accident, he whispered, the words tasting like ash, the dramatic weight of the realization pressing down until the room seemed to shrink. The emotional climax hit like a physical blow. The horror of acknowledging the depth of human cruelty, the calculated planning behind the destruction of innocent lives. A single drop of sweat tracked a path down his temple, catching the sterile fluorescent light in a strong cinematic detail that highlighted his isolation in this horrifying truth. He looked back at the arrangement of evidence, his gaze locking onto a set of muddy boot prints photographed near the site, larger than any they'd accounted for, pointing back towards the town's edge. They needed to follow the tracks. The conspiracy ran deeper than they could have imagined. The fluorescent hum of the hardware store usually soothed, the scent of sawdust and fresh paint a familiar comfort, but today it felt alien, suffocating. Sarah trailed her fingers along a row of paint sample cards, a futile attempt at normalcy, while Tom lingered by the fasteners, his gaze distant. For weeks, the air around them had crackled with a frantic energy, a desperate hunt fueled by a single, chilling lead. They had studied photographs, listened to whispers, traced the edges of suspicion, like bloodhounds on a cold trail. Now the trail had led here, to this aisle filled with power tools and potential dangers. Then she saw him. Across the aisle, half obscured by a display of gardening spades, stood the man from the photographs. David. The name felt like ash in her mouth. He was older than the picture suggested, his face lined, but the eyes, those unnervingly calm, empty eyes, were unmistakable. A cold shock seized Sarah, locking her feet to the linoleum floor. Her breath hitched. A silent gasp trapped in her chest. Beside her, Tom froze too, his hand hovering over a box of washers, knuckles white. Time seemed to warp, the cheerful muzak fading to a low, ominous thrum in her ears. She saw his hands, calloused and thick, idly sifting through a bin of work gloves, his movements slow, deliberate. It's him. God, it's really him. A violent tremor ran through her, part fear, part righteous fury. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to lunge across the aisle, to claw at him, to demand answers, to make him hurt like they hurt. But another voice, smaller, colder, whispered caution. He didn't seem to notice them, his gaze fixed on the gloves, or maybe looking through them, into some private, dark distance. His stillness was unnerving, a predator blending into the mundane landscape. Tom's eyes met hers, a shared look of raw, terrifying recognition, mingled with the terrible question, "What do we do?" He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Not yet. The air between them thickened, charged with unarticulated threats and suppressed violence. David finally selected a pair of thick leather gloves, dropped them into a small basket he carried, and turned slowly, his eyes sweeping casually across the aisle before moving on. For a fleeting second, his gaze brushed past Sarah and Tom, completely devoid of recognition, or so it seemed. Just a blank, indifferent glance before he ambled down the aisle towards the back of the store, towards the lumber section. He didn't see them, or he pretended not to. The distinction was terrifying. As his form disappeared behind a stack of plywood, Sarah felt the paralysis break, replaced by a surging, desperate need to follow. He was going deeper into the store, towards the less seen corners. The pieces lay scattered across the table, frayed ropes, faded fabric scraps, a local geological survey map marked with worn creases. They pored over the fragments, tracing lines with trembling fingers, cross-referencing cryptic notes found among the recovered debris with witness testimonies and historical records that had once seemed irrelevant. A cold dread began to pool in the pit of their stomachs as a pattern emerged, linking seemingly random clues into a horrifying tapestry. It wasn't just that she was gone. It was the chilling precision of the how and the desolate isolation of the where. The map showed a rarely accessed sinkhole, known locally only to a few seasoned explorers, far from any path or road, a place designed for secrecy, for ensuring silence. The fabric scraps matched pieces described in other accounts of similar, hushed-up events from years past. The way the ropes were tied spoke of deliberate restraint, not accident. A gasp caught in his throat as he saw it. A specific knot he'd taught her playfully years ago. A simple slit knot for camping trips, twisted now into something sinister, a symbol of utter helplessness. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob that shook her entire frame. Understanding settled over them like a physical weight, crushing the last vestiges of hopeful denial. It wasn't quick. It wasn't merciful. Their vibrant, trusting girl, who had packed her favorite worn teddy bear for that trip, had been taken to a place of utter darkness and subjected to something cruel, something ritualistic, something that mocked her innocence. The sheer, unfathomable injustice of it all ripped through their carefully constructed composure. The air grew thin, heavy with unshed tears and silent screams. Every happy memory of her laugh, the way her eyes sparkled when she was excited, the feel of her hand in theirs, became a painful counterpoint to the desolate image forming in their minds. There was no turning away from it now, no pretending it was anything less than pure evil. And in that moment, as the full, horrifying shape of the truth solidified, grief curdled into something hard and dangerous, a fierce, protective fire that demanded answers and retribution from the shadows where such monstrous acts were born. The sterile conference room air tasted of stale coffee and worn paper, a harsh contrast to the burning intensity in Sarah's chest. Across the polished table, detectives spoke in measured tones, tracing lines on a map of the rugged area where they believed the answers lay hidden. Each line, each calculated step of the plan, felt like a thread pulling taut around her heart. This was it, the strategizing for reckoning. Detective Miller, his face etched with weary resolve, pointed to a potential entry point. We approach from the north, minimal cover, but it puts us downwind. Sarah's gaze didn't leave the map, specifically the small circled area. She remembered a picnic there years ago, sunlight filtering through the pines, the sound of her child's laughter echoing in the quiet woods. A sharp, nostalgic pang hit her, so powerful it made her hands tremble under the table. She clasped John's hand, his grip instantly firm, a silent anchor. They talked about entry protocols, potential resistance, contingency plans. Each technical term felt like a cruel abstraction, layered over the raw wound of their loss. John leaned forward, his voice low but steel-edged. "We need to be there." Miller shook his head slowly. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans, this is a police operation. Too dangerous." The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken conflict. Sarah felt the fierce determination for justice surge, an almost physical need to witness this moment, to face those who had taken everything. But another part, a primal protective instinct, screamed for safety, for a clean, controlled resolution, even if it meant staying miles away. Could I bear to see their faces? Could I bear not to? The internal debate raged, a silent storm behind her composed facade. The detectives finished outlining the tactical approach, the silence that followed pregnant with the weight of their decision. Sarah looked at John, then at the map, then finally met Miller's gaze. "Okay," she breathed, the single word carrying the full, crushing weight of consent. It was a clear emotional climax, the moment they committed to this perilous path, trusting their child's fate to the plan laid out before them. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a drumbeat towards the unknown future. Miller nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their sacrifice. He gathered the papers, the rustle loud in the sudden quiet. "We move out at dawn," he stated, his voice clipped and final. He stood, gathering the diagrams, his keys jingling softly as he pocketed them, a mundane sound that somehow made the imminent danger terrifyingly real. The plan was set. The wait had begun. The old disused ranger station sat like a forgotten scar on the edge of the territory they were about to enter, its windows' dark eyes staring out at the oppressive night. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, fear, and 18 years of unresolved agony. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows that mirrored the anxieties twisting in their guts. Detective Miller, his face etched with lines that weren't there when this started, knelt beside a sprawling map laid out on a folding table, his finger tracing paths that had haunted his dreams for nearly 2 decades. Around him, the parents huddled, a silent, tight-knit group forged in shared despair. Sarah clutched a faded, dog-eared photograph of her daughter, the bright, laughing face a cruel contrast to the grim reality pressing down. 17 years. Every missed birthday, every empty chair at the holidays, every moment of agonizing uncertainty had led them here, to this cold, sterile room, waiting. A low hum from the radio on the table was the only sound breaking the silence, a constant reminder of the fragile link to the outside world and the potential chaos waiting just beyond the station walls. James ran a hand through his thinning hair, his gaze fixed on the doorway, imagining the face he'd only ever seen in fragmented nightmares. There was no turning back now, only the daunting, terrifying step forward into the unknown. The weight of every lost year, every tear shed, every flicker of false hope rested on this single, precarious moment. A cold dread seeped into their bones, yet beneath it burned a fierce, unwavering resolve. This wasn't just a rescue, it was the reclaiming of lives stolen. Miller looked up, his eyes meeting theirs, a shared understanding passing between them. The time had come. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the cries of the past, urging them forward into the waiting darkness. They rose, a slow, deliberate movement, each step heavy with the burden of their journey. The ranger station's door, a dark maw leading into the final act. The air inside the derelict canning shed hung thick with the scent of decay and stale seawater, a metallic tang clinging to everything. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of weak sunlight, piercing a broken pane high above, illuminating the figure huddled amongst rusted machinery and forgotten crates. For years, silence had reigned here, broken only by the cries of gulls and the distant rumble of waves. Now, it was shattered by the quiet clicks of weapons securing, the low, tense breathing of the officers, and the pounding in Sarah's own chest. This was it. The end of the hunt that had consumed her, the place where the threads of history and horror converged. He didn't look like a monster, just an old man with vacant eyes staring into the gloom, his confession barely a whisper that still somehow echoed through the cavernous space, a chilling confirmation of the truth they had unearthed in the bus, the truth of the ritual. It had to be done, he mumbled, his voice scratchy like sandpaper, a sound that scraped against the soul. Sarah watched, her heart aching with a profound, heavy sadness that was both for the victims and for the twisted path this man had walked. There was no triumph in his capture, only the hollow echo of lives stolen and a darkness that refused to lift entirely. As they moved in, the beam of a flashlight cut across the floor, revealing a small, tarnished silver pendant clutched in his hand. The same symbol found near the bus, the same symbol whispered about in the town's hushed histories. It felt like a morbid trophy, a final, sickening detail in a saga of loss. The clinking of handcuffs was stark and final, sealing his fate but not quite sealing the wound left by his actions. The intensity of the moment was unbearable, a knot of relief, anger, and sorrow tightening in her throat. Outside, the world continued, oblivious, but inside these walls, a terrible chapter was closing. The silence returned gradually after they led him away, but it was a different silence now, heavy with the weight of what had been revealed. The rusted machinery seemed to hum with a silent, lingering question about the secrets still buried beneath the surface, the ripple effects of his choices stretching further than they knew. The world felt strangely muted after the final gavel fell, after the news reports faded, after the last handshake of congratulation or sorrow. It was over. The relentless, consuming chase that had defined their existence for so long was suddenly, irrevocably finished. A fragile shell of relief initially settled over them, like thin ice forming on a troubled lake, but it cracked almost instantly under the weight of what was buried beneath. Sorrow rose, cold and sharp. For all the stolen years, the milestones missed, the futures extinguished. They walked through their familiar home, the silence amplifying the absence, the dust motes dancing in a sunbeam highlighting the stagnation of time in their own life while the world outside moved on. An intense wave of anger followed, hot and bitter, burning through the fragile calm. Anger at the perpetrators, at the system's slowness, at the sheer, senseless waste of it all. Why did it take so long? The thought echoed, a relentless internal scream. This wasn't justice served neatly. It was justice wrestled from the jaws of time, leaving scars that would never truly fade. They sat by the window, watching the leaves fall outside, each one a small, silent reminder of the passage of seasons they had barely registered while consumed by their quest. A profound emptiness began to settle in the space where the obsession had resided. The goal was gone, the adversary vanquished, but the victory offered no true solace, only a vast, echoing void. The future stretched before them, not bright and inviting, but uncertain and terrifyingly quiet. The fight was over, but the internal rebuilding had just begun, piece by broken piece, in the deafening silence of closure. The years that followed the discovery did not erase the empty chair at the dinner table, nor the phantom echo of laughter that once filled the house. Healing began not with a dramatic flourish, but with the painstaking, silent act of rearranging furniture, of packing away clothes they could no longer bear to see hanging empty. Then slowly, cautiously, pulling out a single photograph, letting their eyes trace the familiar curve of a smile. Her mother, Sarah, found solace in tending a small garden, coaxing reluctant roses from the soil. Each thorny stem, a quiet reminder of the resilience needed to bloom after harsh frost. Her father, David, spent hours in the garage, meticulously restoring an old wooden chest, the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper against wood, a dull counterpoint to the frantic tempo their hearts had beaten for so long. They talked about her often now, not just the lost girl the victim etched into headlines, but the clumsy teenager who spilled paint on the carpet, the bright student with messy handwriting, the daughter who loved the scent of rain on pavement. There was a breakthrough one spring afternoon when Sarah, kneeling among her roses, felt a sudden, sharp pang of loss, so raw it stole her breath. But this time, beneath the pain, a memory surfaced. Her daughter's delighted squeal as she chased butterflies through this very yard. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, hot and cleansing, but they were not just tears of grief. A fragile warmth bloomed in her chest, the memory a precious gift retrieved from the wreckage. This was not forgetting, but integrating, learning to carry the weight of sorrow while still feeling the lightness of love. They started visiting a quiet section of the local park, the one with the big oak tree she used to climb, not with heavy hearts weighed down by the tragedy, but with a lighter step, bringing her favorite book to read aloud, the gentle rustle of leaves echoing their quiet words. The closure the discovery brought was not a door slammed shut on the past, but a painful key that unlocked the future, allowing them to step tentatively onto a path that acknowledged the unhealable wound while recognizing the life that still stretched before them. The scar remained, a permanent, aching mark, but it no longer consumed them entirely. Their lives, though irrevocably changed, were slowly, imperfectly being woven back together. Yet the quiet moments, the unexpected scent, the sight of another girl her age, these things could still fracture the fragile piece they had built, reminding them that some parts of the story felt unfinished even now. 17 years. The number felt like a physical weight, a stone carried deep in her chest. For so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. 17 years of staring into the abyss, of the world moving on, while her own stood frozen in that terrible moment. The darkness hadn't just been the absence of light, it had been a tangible presence, a cold fog that seeped into every corner of their lives, chilling laughter, muting color. She remembered sitting by the window in the old house, the dust motes dancing in the thin sunlight, feeling utterly disconnected from the vibrant world outside, trapped in a loop of silent screams and unanswered questions. That relentless, grinding despair had worn down bone and spirit. Then the breakthrough came, sudden and jarring as a lightning strike in a clear sky. The uncovering, the truth, raw and brutal, finally dragged into the light after hiding for so long. It wasn't a relief that felt like elation, but a different kind of weightlifting, replaced by the heavy, complicated burden of justice finally served. She sat in the quiet courtroom gallery, watching the faces below, listening to the clinical pronouncements, and a strange stillness settled over her. It was over. The fight that had consumed her life, defined her existence for close to 2 decades, had reached its end. But in that stillness, something unexpected stirred, not just the lingering ache of the past still whispering, but a stubborn, resilient warmth. It was the enduring thread of love that had held them together, frayed but never broken. It was the undeniable strength they had found in each other, in the shared pursuit of truth, a strength forged in the crucible of unimaginable pain. She thought of others still lost in their own darkness, searching, hurting. If they could emerge from 17 years of night, battered but standing, perhaps others could too. Perhaps their story, the sheer brutal endurance of it, could offer a sliver of light to those trapped in similar shadows. The thought was a tender shoot pushing through concrete, fragile but determined. The suffering was immense, a scar that would never fade, but it hadn't consumed everything. Hope, a quiet, persistent hum, remained, and with it, the possibility of extending a hand, of using the hard-won lessons of their journey to illuminate the path for others, stepping towards a different kind of dawn. The different kind of dawn wasn't bathed in radiant light. It was muted, hazy, the air still carrying the scent of the storm that had raged for so long. The intense emotions that had fueled her for 17 years, the raw grief, the searing anger, the gnawing fear, had receded, leaving behind a landscape of milder yet still deeply unpleasant feelings. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was more like a profound stillness, a silence where there had once been screams, but a silence that echoed with phantom sounds. The weariness was a physical entity, a heavy cloak she couldn't shed. Relief existed, a quiet sigh deep in her bones, but it was inextricably tangled with the persistent ache of what had been lost, what could never be returned. The distribution of emotions was complex. A thin layer of gratitude for justice finally found, spread over the vast, uneven terrain of sorrow and trauma. There were no peaks of joy, no valleys of utter despair, just a long, flat plain of quiet endurance. The fight was over, but the war within continued, albeit at a much lower intensity. It was like living with a chronic condition, manageable, but always present. Yet even on this gray plain, she saw the faint, shimmering outline of a path ahead, a path not defined by the past, but leading towards something new. It wasn't a grand highway, but a narrow track, subtly illuminated. It was the path towards quiet healing, towards finding small pockets of kindness in the world, towards keeping the door open for those who still walked in the deepest night. A quiet lamp burning in the window,